It was another emotional day at the inquest into the disappearance of Tasmanian Lucille Butterworth. A former junior detective assigned to the case has told the inquest he thought it was being mishandled. Edith Bevin filed this report from the inquest.
Former Detective Senior Constable Frank Webb's distress was evident on the stand as he spoke of his inability to convince his senior officers Lucille Butterworth hadn't just shot through. The 20-year-old part-time model vanished in August 1969. Mr Webb was assigned to the case in the days after, saying despite all evidence to the contrary, Lucille Butterworth was treated as a missing person.
And it just was the fact that it was a hamstring in the early stages.
A report he wrote in 1970 was read to the court. In it he said, "I find no evidence to suggest this girl would run away on impulse. On the contrary, it would appear this girl was very fond of and attached to her family." He said he and other detectives were raring to go to find Lucille Butterworth, but the attitude of senior officers was, "Don't waste your time." Unfortunately, there was a bit of an attitude from some of the senior officers that this girl has shot through with a fella and she'll be back in 3 or 4 days. He said the then CIB boss, Detective Superintendent Tom Stewart, thought the 20-year-old was flighty. Former Detective Webb told how detectives would sit at the bus stop around the time of day Lucille Butterworth disappeared, taking notes of cars and number plates and interviewing passers-by. He said the investigation was appallingly mishandled in its early stages, with no direction or leadership until it was too late. The former officer said he was unaware of Jeffrey Hunt until he was arrested 7 years later for the murder of Suzanne Knight. Hunt has been named as the main person of interest in the inquest. Jim Butterworth finished his evidence with an emotional message to his sister.
We need to know that we tried our hardest with all the strength in our bodies to find you and bring you home. And we will never give up until someone has been brought to justice. But you'll be with us always in our hearts and souls, and your memory will last forever. You will always remain beautiful and forever young.
A northern Tasmanian man's been jailed for 21 years for the murder of his 9-week-old daughter. The court heard baby Azali had massive injuries to her head and body. Edith Bevin reports.
Baby Azali's mother sobbed as she heard the extent of the violence her ex-partner inflicted on their 9-week-old child in 2014. The attack happened in Deloraine while Brett Andrew Kitchen was withdrawing from the drug ice. Justice Helen Wood said Kitchen became enraged when the newborn would not feed, shaking the baby so hard he caused massive brain injuries. She described it as an act of severe and sustained violence. His moral culpability is substantial. She was utterly defenceless and pitifully vulnerable. Kitchen had abused the baby throughout her short life, screaming in her face, pinching her when she wouldn't feed, throwing her in the air and squeezing her chest and throat. At the time of her death, baby Azali had massive head injuries, bruising to much of her body, internal bruising to her throat and 15 fractures to her ribs. Justice Wood dismissed his lawyer's argument that it was the actions of an inexperienced parent. This is not the conduct of a caring but ill-informed parent. His duty of care was to protect and nurture his daughter. Acknowledging the mother's severe grief, Justice Wood sentenced Kitchen to 23 years jail, saying she wanted to send a message to other parents using drugs of the risk they pose to their children. Edith Bevin, ABC News.
Tasmania's retiring Chief Magistrate has spoken out against 2 major legal reforms being planned by the state government. After almost 30 years on the bench, Michael Hill says suspended sentences are an important part of the court's options. And he says he can't see the point of imposing an extra levy on the guilty, as well as existing fines and court costs.
This is what the courts looked like when Michael Hill became a magistrate in 1988. But it's not just the aesthetics that's changed in the 27 years the now Chief Magistrate has sat on the bench. He's pioneered therapeutic jurisprudence in Tasmania, believing that in many of the 30,000 cases that go through Tasmania's courts each year, court-ordered rehabilitation or treatment is a better option than jail.
The majority of them suffer from difficulties such as mental health and the other areas that I've spoken about. So if we are going to try and stop the numbers and stop the revolving door, we really have to do something about the conditions which really are the motivating forces behind their offending.
He was instrumental in introducing the Mental Health Division into the Magistrates Court. He's also helped establish the Drug Court, where defendants commit to a program of rehabilitation, including regular drug testing. But he says there's more that can be done.
The court doesn't run programs. The court can facilitate the referral of people into programs. But it's disappointing when we attempt to do some good work with people when we see that there's really nowhere for us to send them.
He's dealt with tens of thousands of cases, some of them with horrific details, but has somehow managed to avoid becoming jaded.
The exchanges can be quite jovial, other times not so. But, you know, we're dealing with human beings and we want to make it a human system so that they're part of that system and so that they're listened to and not just simply treated like they're on a conveyor belt.
But he admits there are cases that have lingered.
When I was doing what was then a child welfare case, now a child protection case, when I had to make an order that a young child was taken from its mother for various reasons, and she reacted with great distress and emotion, and I've never forgotten that particular case.
After the birth of 2 new grandchildren and the death of his brother this year, Mr Hill is stepping down from the bench.
I'm a bit wistful about it, a bit sad. I really enjoy the job, but I think the time's come for me to just move on to some other things.
The magistrate, famed for his therapeutic approach, leaves with some concerns about where justice is headed. The Liberal government is pushing ahead with scrapping suspended sentences.
I've always thought suspended sentences to be a very effective weapon in the court's armoury of sentencing options, and I still think that.
And imposing a levy on people if convicted.
I really can't see where it'll help at all, but you know, I've always had a bit of an issue with increasing pecuniary penalties when there isn't a commensurate increase in the incomes available to the persons who come to the courts.
His final day is Wednesday. Launceston-based magistrate Michael Brett will be the state's new Chief Magistrate. Edith Bevin, ABC News.